Rome is often and rightly thought of as one of the most powerful states in history. But have you ever asked how it all began? Well, if you have, it turns out you have something in common with ancient Romans. The Romans themselves had many stories to explain their origins, and these tales helped shape how they saw themselves and their place in the world. Two legendary tales were of particular significance. The first is the story of Aeneas, a hero from the Trojan War who traveled to Italy and became one of Rome's legendary ancestors. The second is the tale of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers who were raised by a she-wolf and went on to found the city on the Palatine Hill. Although we don't know for sure how much of these stories have a kernel of real history, they still reveal a lot about Roman identity. In this video, we'll look at why these foundation myths mattered so much to Romans. We'll explore what they said about Aeneas and the Trojan connection, and how Romulus and Remus were supposed to have built Rome and the early Roman kingdom. We'll consider how Romans used these myths to unify themselves, legitimize their power, and shape their identity. Finally, we'll also find out what modern archaeology tells us about the city's early history. Why did these foundational myths matter so much to the Romans? Simply put, since ancient times, people relied on shared stories, ceremonies, and beliefs to form a common identity. Foundation myths acted like a cultural glue, giving the Romans a common narrative that explained who they were and why their city was special. By saying they descended from legendary heroes like Aeneas, who escaped the destruction of Troy, Romans could tell themselves and the world that they were destined for greatness. Another aspect that we modern people may tend to downplay is the role of the connection to the gods. Romulus and Remus, like Aeneas, were divinely descended, with their father being Mars, the god of war. People believed that if their leaders succeeded in battle or politics, it meant they'd earned divine favor. Linking Rome's birth to deities like Mars or Venus suggested that the city was protected and guided from the start by higher powers. It also implicitly stated that even the lowliest Roman citizen was, at the very least, semi-divine. This belief shaped Roman religion and politics for generations. When the Roman state expanded, they could say, "Look, the gods wanted us to succeed. It's been part of our destiny since our founding." Foundation myths didn't just say Rome is special, they also contained moral and political lessons. For instance, Aeneas' sense of duty toward the gods, his family, and his future city became a model of piety, which Romans considered one of their key virtues. Romulus's military strengths and ability to organize the first Roman institutions also served as a lesson in leadership and state building. As different generations retold the stories, they tweaked certain elements to stress the traits they admired, like bravery, piety, or loyalty. Anyway, let's dive deep into the actual myths themselves, starting with Aeneas. Aeneas is best known from the epic poem called the Aeneid, written by Virgil in the late 1st century BC, during the early years of the reign of the first emperor, Augustus. But Aeneas wasn't Virgil's invention. He appears in Homer's Iliad as a minor hero fighting on the Trojan side, and his story had grown along with Rome. According to the legend, when Troy was destroyed by the Greeks, the gods told Aeneas to flee with his family and a group of Trojan survivors. At one point, during a storm orchestrated by the gods, Aeneas's fleet washed ashore in Carthage, where Queen Dido graciously welcomed him. Enchanted by his valiant spirit, Dido fell in love, and for a time, the two shared both passion and peaceful relations. However, the gods intervened, reminding Aeneas of his greater mission. Torn between devotion to Dido and his duty, Aeneas reluctantly departed under cover of darkness. Heartbroken and betrayed, Dido ran herself through with Aeneas' sword, cursing his future lineage. Her death would later be viewed as the basis for the historical hostility between Carthage and Rome. After a long, dangerous journey across the Mediterranean Sea, Aeneas and the remaining Trojans landed on the shores of Italy. There, he married into a local royal family, set up a kingdom in Latium, and became an ancestor of the Roman people. In most versions of the story, Aeneas is the son of a mortal and the goddess Venus, or Aphrodite in the original Greek myth. Aeneas's mother Venus often protected him during his trials following the Trojan War. This idea that the gods guided and protected Rome from its very beginnings was something Romans never stopped believing, especially when it came to war or politics. It also offered a way for Roman leaders to say they had inherited a special relationship with the divine. Aeneas and the Trojan connection gave Rome a place in the world of Homeric heroes. It was in essence their way of saying, we may have started out as simple farmers on the Tiber River, but our family tree goes back to one of the greatest conflicts in ancient mythology. While Aeneas gave Rome a Trojan past, Romulus and Remus gave the city its immediate and dramatic birth. According to legend, they were the sons of the Vestal virgin Rhea Silvia and the war god Mars. Their great-uncle, King Amulius, feared these newborns would challenge his power, so he had them tossed into the Tiber River. But fate intervened. The twins washed ashore near the Palatine Hill, where they were famously nursed by a she-wolf. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus found them, raised them, and helped them discover their royal lineage. As young men, Romulus and Remus decided to start a new city, but they argued about where to build it. Romulus wanted the Palatine Hill, while Remus favored the Aventine. They agreed to see who would get a better omen from the gods, often described as how many birds they could see in the sky. Romulus claimed victory. When Remus mocked him by jumping over the boundary Romulus was digging, Romulus slew his brother in a fit of rage. This dark moment, fratricide, became part of Roman lore, suggesting that Rome's birth was marked by violence and tension. According to tradition, Romulus named the city Roma after himself and became its first king. He's credited with several key accomplishments that became key to the Roman state throughout the Roman kingdom, republic, and empire. Perhaps most famously, he's traditionally given credit for creating the Senate by choosing 100 men from noble families. In an effort to strengthen his new kingdom, Romulus opened the city up for all sorts of refugees and outcasts in the local area. These outcasts were largely men of questionable background and character, and Rome, according to traditional tellings, had a significant gender imbalance. This led to the event that Romulus is likely most famous for, aside from the founding of Rome itself, the abduction of the Sabine women. Because Rome had a shortage of women, Romulus arranged a festival and kidnapped the daughters of the neighboring Sabines. These abductees were eventually married off to Roman men. The Sabines, led by King Titus Tatius, launched a major attack to retrieve their daughters. The Sabines came extremely close to snuffing out the budding Roman state when the Sabine women intervened and begged their husbands and fathers to stop fighting. Their pleas worked, and the Romans and Sabines were united as one, with Tatius becoming co-ruler with Romulus. While obviously horrifying to modern eyes, this was how ancient Romans explained Rome's first marriages to outsiders and why the Sabines joined with the Romans. According to traditional accounts, after a 37-year reign, Romulus was caught up in a whirlwind, never to be seen or heard from again. Given his status, most Romans eventually came to believe that he was called to the heavens by Mars to continue to guide Rome, and he was eventually deified centuries later. When we look at this story critically, we notice the many folkloric elements: twins of divine parentage, a miraculous rescue by animals, and an evil king who tries to slay them. Similar stories appear in myths from around the world, which suggests these details are more symbolic than literal. However, many ancient writers, like Livy and Plutarch, told these stories as if it were real history. Some ancient writers believed that the profound negativity surrounding Romulus reflected the accuracy of the story. Simply put, why would anyone make up an origin story where you're descended from a fratricidal king, the Italian peninsula's rejects and outcasts, and women who weren't there willingly? Oh, and let's not forget Aeneas is no great hero either. He wasn't on the winning side, and rather than stay and fall heroically with his comrades, he fled. Some modern historians have suggested that the negative elements associated with the founding of Rome may actually have been Greek inventions to malign the Roman state. In favor of this theory, the Greek polities in southern Italy and Sicily, known as Magna Graecia, were early and formidable foes of the Roman state. That said, this theory remains entirely speculative at this point. My personal speculation is that as Rome moved from a kingdom to a republic, the character of Romulus was degraded substantially. After all, it arguably wouldn't make a lot of sense to have a perfect idealized forebearer for your republic as a kingly figure. Instead, Romans during the Republican period could look at a figure as hallowed as Romulus and say, even the best king should have limitations in place. But before we close out here today, let's take a brief look at the archaeological evidence for the founding of Rome. Modern archaeologists have found evidence of huts and fortifications on the Palatine Hill from around the mid-8th century BC, which is when tradition says Romulus founded Rome. Even though we can't prove Romulus existed, the general time frame of the myth might reflect a period of real settlement growth in the area.